Hey guys, Thomas the Silly Genie here, aka Mustached Tom, here to review the movie Venom. I know I'm a bit late, but that is the nature of my channel. I'm always late for everything. So before I begin my review, I suppose I should tell you what I know about Venom. So my primary source for Venom is from the one of the earlier shows of Spider-Man that used to come out, and I used to regularly watch it and see that at some point later on, Venom was introduced to that show, as well as later on, even further, Carnage as well. I've not read any of the comics, uh, and most of my knowledge from about Venom comes from, well, Spider-Man show. Nonetheless, I knew going in that Spider-Man was not going to be present in this movie. So it was a bit weird going in and seeing this sort of retelling, revamping of the story of Eddie Brock as a character. Uh, Whoever was put behind this wanted to clearly rework the story. Um, from what I can remember, and I could be misremembering, and probably got this from the Spider-Man 3 movie. I don't know if that's the official, like, canonized version of Venom coming to be, which is, it was partially Peter Parker's fault that Eddie became Venom. I'm not sure if that's, like, the canonical, like, that's how Venom became Venom sort of deal, but they changed that here, as well as show the rest of what Venom can offer slightly in this movie as well. So, what this movie is attempting to do is retell Eddie's story, uh, rework Venom very slightly to sort of vaguely kind of go off of the comics, because I did look into it just a bit enough to hear the name Drake, look into the comic, and learn that is where the main villain of this movie kind of comes from. So at least they covered that. I don't know how accurate it is again, but I will be reviewing the movie as it is. So with that being said, this movie, not so surprisingly, starts off in space, and a shuttle crashes down onto Earth, and with this shuttle crashing down on back to Earth, there were a few vials containing symbiotes within them. Among them were the black goo, had, which I'm going to just assume is the Venom one, and two others get out. There is a yellow one that gets out, and another one that gets out later on. And I think this movie is also trying to establish the separation anxiety uh, among the one that is introduced in this one primarily as the main villain, and the one that really doesn't. We don't really know what ends up happening to the yellow one at the end of the movie, so there's that. It just sort of leaves the movie, and it's so bizarre. Um, but the ones that we are aware of, there's at least three that we are, again, see. So, anyways, one of the astronauts had lived, and he was the one who is possessed, and it takes over a woman, who a paramedic, who eventually make walks around afterward. So it cuts to Eddie Brock, who has a wife named Anne, and it cuts to this sort of landscape shop with rap music of all things. It doesn't really fit the tone of this entire movie, quite frankly, but it does a quick montage of what Eddie Brock does, which is work with news. He's a reporter. That much is clear. And again, they try to speed rush through his entire backstory. So they're, they kind of try to rush it because there's a lot going on here. Anyways, he works his way into the office in which he works, and he gets a mission to essentially get some info about Drake, the lead scientist who was sending out these space shuttles in the first place. So Eddie agrees to this and afterwards meets up with his wife, Anne. And the wife kind of explains a little bit that she sort of works under him, that being Drake. And they make out at home, and there isn't too much established about this relationship other than they seem to be almost he's about to propose to her. That's later discovered in the movie, but nonetheless, when he is awake late at night, he decides to snoop around her laptop and get some deep info onto this Drake character. Meanwhile, we cut to Drake, who is getting questioned by all these little children, and then he is pulled away to Eddie, who asks the important questions about what is really going on, and gets kicked out because of this. So, because of this misconduct, he is fired from his job. His wife breaks up with him because she was fired as well. And again, as I mentioned, if that is canonic, if Spider-Man's 3 story is canonically true, again, changing of the backstory up until this point. So, Drake opens one of the goo or symbiote vials. Meanwhile, the medic starts to roam around and starts to kill someone and then kill several more people sort of close to end, they're at the edge of the frame of the screen, and then they get pulled off screen whenever they die. And goes up to this old lady and takes over her, but it cuts away as soon as that's implied. So in the lab, we cut to that, a bunny is given the yellow symbiote. And again, what is done with that is never, that never comes to any conclusion. So Eddie goes to a bar, feeling completely washed out of everything, and shortly leaves the bar after seeing Drake on the news. And so he sees some homeless lady, and then gives her some money, and then goes to visit this grocery store where this woman gets robbed, and Eddie just sort of sits back and watches. And I think what this scene was supposed to do, and I could be wrong, is sort of pay homage to Spider-Man. The whole sort of oh, this person's being robbed, I'm not gonna do anything. But Venom doesn't have an Uncle Ben to die for him. So he's just gonna sit there and sort of just watch, and then have the bad guy get away for the time being, for a scene later on in the movie. Nonetheless, so he's looking for new jobs, that being Eddie. He's hearing the loud music, he's just going blah, life sucks right now. So, meanwhile, a test subject is moved into the symbiote zone, and this guy who's put inside, his name is Isaac, and Drake goes on about this whole religious aspect and how God has abandoned them, and it gets a little bit weird. But the symbiote goes inside Isaac, and it does not take. The creature instead kills Isaac because it is not a match for it. So, Eddie goes to a random store. I don't know if it was the same store or not, but we meet Doris or Dora, whatever her name was. It's one of the two. I wrote Doris, um, and she was one of the previous scientists who is now undercover and is trying to get Eddie in on this situation about Drake. But Eddie wants nothing to do with it and tries to leave. He goes by Annie's place, the ex, and she's now uh, hanging out with some new guy named Dan, who's a doctor. So Annie wants nothing to do with Eddie now. So when he's left alone, he decides to just opt up and go to see Doris or Dora. So she's telling him all about the stuff about the ship and how things have been happening. And she pushes Eddie forward into this separate area while she takes on this guard to, like, essentially distract him. And he starts to take pictures because he has his camera. So, he gets up to this casing and sees one of, I think it was the homeless woman, who now has this symbiote somehow. I'm not sure how she obtained it. And I don't also know how she ended up there specifically. I think there was probably two or one at least scene cut from this movie very clearly, because I don't know how, one, she even got the symbiote, and two, how she got there. So there are definitely some things missing from this movie. I think this movie could have been improved by being a tad bit longer, if anything, to really explore all these ideas. Nonetheless, so, he does eventually break her out, and then he gets attacked by her. So the woman in question dies, and the symbiote who was attached to her happens to be Venom, and it goes inside Eddie. So he starts to rush out as the facility that he is in lights up and the guards are after him, and he's sort of freaking out while the symbiote powers are sort of manifesting out of him, sort of unbeknownst to him, while he's sort of, again, just freaking out. And the guards try to shoot at him, and he's trying to run away, and he keeps fleeing, and he ends up on top of a tree all the way. And then it makes an instant cut of him just being home and trying to make some of these calls. He's like eating like crazy, vomiting, and then he hears Venom's voice and freaks out and passes out. So the symbiote test seems to have worked on another subject. I forgot which one it was at this point. I just wrote that it worked on another one. But nonetheless, the old lady infected one, we cut back to her, and she moves on to a little girl. So now that symbiote is in a little girl. So Venom keeps requiring more food. So Eddie goes up to where Anne and Dan, the doctor, are, which is in this fancy restaurant, and he starts to go a little bit crazy, wanting food, and then getting live food via lobsters, and then people are like freaking out, and he's just in the water. So Dan is trying to figure out what's going on with Eddie, and then they go to this MRI, and Venom freaks out because the MRI makes too much noise, and then it cuts from there back to Doris, who runs into two guards who somehow find out that she's the one responsible for all this going down. And while that's going on, these two scientists test that the sound is something that hurts one of the symbiotes that's inside this random guy. So, anyways, Venom is hungry again, and Anne is calling Eddie. Well, she's talking about the parasite. That's what they refer to it very constantly throughout the movie, and Venom is not a fan of that word. Uh, so Eddie's hearing the voice as he's trying to make these calls, and he's dealing with Dan as well. Uh, so the music that his neighbor plays goes back on, and that bit comes back from that, and Venom freaks the neighbor out. So, Drake wants to get some info from Doris, since she was the one that essentially did all of this, and she eventually tells the truth, and then she gets left to a symbiote to get attacked. I'm not sure which symbiote it was, but it was one of them. I think it was the one that was left behind from the previous experiments. I assume it's that one. Anyway, so we see that Eddie opens the door, and Venom somehow knows that these guys are coming in from outside, and I don't know if that's something Venom is capable of. Again, I'm not too familiar with Venom. Um, but yeah, that one was a little hard to swallow. Again, just Venom somehow knowing that these guys are coming after him from way outside the room. But yeah, they do start to attack them, and then Venom's does indeed start to attack them. And I will say they, since now Eddie and Venom are one, jump out the window. So Drake, watching this via cam, wants the Venom symbiote specifically. So Eddie works his way from window to window, and he ends up stuck on this little wall after he gets down, and then he eventually takes on gets to this motorcycle and flees from various goons and as well as drones, and with the help of Venom in this rather long chase sequence, where stuff blows up and stuff goes in slow-mo, and he gets disattached from the bike, and then Venom helps him get back to the bike, and stuff of all that craziness goes down. So Venom takes over completely after one of the guys almost gets him, and he dives into the water and runs off, and it turns back to Eddie. And then Venom proceeds to tell him how he found Eddie. He's moving around, the purpose of how he was moving around just to get to Eddie. He somehow knew that Eddie was going to end up in that place. I don't know. That line of thinking, again, a little bit bizarre, but okay. Another, again, hard pill to swallow in this movie. But nonetheless, so Eddie knows that stuff is going on now, and the little girl took over this dog or whatever. Or maybe it remained the little girl, I don't remember. Anyway, Dan and Anne call each other, trying to figure out what the heck is going on with Eddie. And Anne tries to go on ahead. And Eddie is trying to do the right thing by giving the previous info that he got fired for not having this time to his boss. So Venom allows this and takes over to get them upward after getting kicked out and leaves the evidence for this guy. As he leaves, taking the elevator, after turning back, a bunch of soldiers appear and Eddie lets Venom take over by simply saying the word mask. And he proceeds to take them out. Anne somehow knows where he is and then ends up on the scene randomly, and he's trying to apologize, and it cuts back to Drake, who sees the little girl who's the one currently with the symbiotic creature, and the little girl symbiote ends up inside Drake. And for the purposes of just getting it out there, Drake is now with the one with the symbiote, and he is the one known as Riot. And again, I am familiar with that name vaguely enough to know that that's one of the 6 of the Separation Anxiety comic. And I did see one other video that mentions that he is essentially the leader of this group of other symbiotes. So, after that goes down, Venom takes over to essentially attack Dan, and Dan, with the new Riot symbiote, is able to temporarily remove Venom from Eddie. So he had went to the hospital again, and Anne played this loud music, and then it escaped via this vent. And then Eddie gets shot down, who no longer has the Venom symbiote in him. So, the Venom creature ends up inside a dog, and then moves along towards Anne. So we do get to see it later on in the movie, female Venom, I guess I'll say, what it is. Anyways, Drake wants to, he's showing the Riot signs, and he's talking to Riot and trying to say, oh, we'll let these symbiotes take over, and they'll let all these other symbiotes come onto this earth and take over or whatever. So, Anne arrives, or the Venom takes over Anne, and then, as I mentioned, goes back to Eddie, how, again, they find each other, I don't know, but they're done via kiss, and then Eddie is returned to Venom, and vice versa. So, we learn through Venom that he was among the symbiotes, sort of like the lower tier of them. He considers himself the loser among the other symbiotes, and Riot, as I mentioned, was the leader. So Riot kills some guy at this office, and then proceeds to empty out the entire room. But in the process of doing that afterwards, Venom now goes after Riot, and they fight. So Riot is taking the lead in the fight, no shock. He's pulling the Venom off of Eddie, and then Venom and Riot start to fuse. But before that can go all the way, Anne gets to the sound area and gets the sound on, and both of the symbiotes are separated from their host. So it's left to get Eddie and Drake to fight each other as humans, and Eddie seems to have the upper hand at this point, but Drake reattaches to Riot and stabs Eddie through the chest, and it's oh no, the hero is dead, only to see Venom eventually slip back on to Eddie as Drake's rocket to go get the other symbiotes lifts off, but Venom messes up the rocket, and the fire consumes both Venom and Riot. And Venom says goodbye, but then ends up back inside Eddie anyway. So that was a bizarre scene, ending scene, or near ending scene. So yes, Eddie manages to survive and get out, and some time passes on. I don't know how many amount of time, but Eddie and Anne talk about what happened. And while they're talking, Eddie does hear Venom sort of talking to him, so he starts to walk, and we get our Stanley cameo. Uh, and then after that, or I should say, Eddie technically goes back to that store that we saw earlier on in the movie, and some guy holding the counter lady again, and then Venom takes over and consumes the guy off screen, and that is how the movie does end. I don't remember if there was an after credits sequence or anything of that nature. There usually are, but I don't know what they are off the top of my head right now. But as a movie, I think the issue of this movie is that there was a lot of ground to cover. They tried to first retell Eddie's story, then they had to get into like how the symbiote found Eddie, while also trying to simultaneously set up the separation anxiety crew with Riot in tow. And again, we don't even know what happened to that yellow symbiote. If that is a part of the after credit sequence, that would be something I'd be interested in, at least somewhat. I mean, it was just sort of left there, and no one really did anything. So that, for all I know, that yellow symbiote is still in that rabbit. I don't know if it ever left. Anyway, so this movie is doing three different things. It's again resetting Eddie's story, telling the rest of Venom's story as it is currently, while also simultaneously setting up the next attempt at a movie, which is clearly separation anxiety, with the rest of the Riot crew. I don't know the rest of their names off the top of my head. And I think, again, that kind of lends itself to probably this movie's biggest issues is that the movie is too short and it's trying to do way too much in it. Again, it's trying to do three different things, and the ending part of it, I think, suffers the most. That setup suffers the most because unless there was an after credit sequence and I'm just not remembering it or didn't watch it or whatever one, regardless, like there didn't seem like there was enough there at that point because there's just so little of it, and it sort of just gets left behind for the most part. Um, but other than that, I have seen other reviews of this after seeing the movie, and I people are going on about how generic it is and how by the numbers it is, and I can get that to an extent. And a lot of people are saying that I think everyone has been saying that a rating, R rating, would have helped this movie significantly. To that, I will agree. I do think a R rating would have helped with the action scenes and allowing Venom to truly, do the maximum carnage. Haha. Puns. If you get that one, then haha. But anyways, to do the maximum carnage, pun intended for a reference, and if you get that reference, then good on ya. But yeah, I think our rating would have definitely helped Venom at least stick out in the fighting scene department. Um, as far as some of the other things, again, there are quite a few conveniences that happen along the film, and happening to find Eddie twice throughout the movie a little bit too convenient. Venom knowing, like, again, I don't know if this is Venom's power, but him knowing that someone's outside the room, again, not so sure about that one. Few hard pills to swallow. Venom, this one I kind of understood a little bit later. It was hard to accept at the time. It was like Venom like knew that he would like survive this jump off of the bike, but he does say later on in the movie that he knows everything that Eddie knows, and Eddie probably knew this area well enough. So I guess that kind of evens out that issue, I guess. It's sort of a suspend your disbelief sort of moment. But the other ones, I'm not so sure. Um, so I'd probably give this movie either 5 or 6 out of 10. I feel like it's sort of halfway to being a pretty decent movie, probably even slightly above. But yeah, again, I do think this movie was trying to do a little bit too much, and because of that, there are some choppy bits thrown in the movie as well. So that is my review of Venom, and if you enjoyed this review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, make sure to check out that link in the description or head over to my Patreon page, and any donations are greatly appreciated. Until next time, everyone, bye-bye.